Seeing Larry Zonka walk out onto that field last night was such a treat for me. I remember doing my first book report in second grade on Larry Zonka. The little school I was at had a library and a little book section for sports, and they had an NFL section. And I don't remember all the books there. I barely remember any of them, but I remember the Larry Zonka book. It was biography on Larry Zonka. Remember the first time he broke his nose, the horseshoe fell off the top of the door onto his nose and broke it the first time. Larry Zonka was so special to me. I loved him as a player still today. Just mountain man walking out to the middle of the field, knowing that this guy was a total freak at one point. And now watching him get older and me I used to be pretty good shape and now I'm getting old. I just have so much empathy for Larry Zonka and love for him. And to see him come out and win, celebrating the 72 season, which was all about winning, we had to win that game. And I'm not, for Don Shula, who's not here, for all the guys that are here and not here, but for me, most of all, it was for Larry Zonka to have him feel great. And in that confines of that emotional feeling, in the confines of that single game, all that matters was the W. Now, this W does not mean the future is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And trends can kind of be weird. If you take a long-term trend, you really have a lot less variability to predict the future, both short and long-term. But when you got a shorter trend, then it gets harder and harder the farther you go away from that trend to accurately predict how things are going to play out. This is why long-term trends are so crucial. We're in a short-term trend cycle right now, for so many reasons, starting with McDaniel, with the offense, yada, yada, yada. We have a bunch of long-term trends wrapped in a bunch of short-term trends, so accurately predicting what's going to happen for the season isn't as easy as some people might want to make it. Now, you might say, we're going to the Super Bowl, and you might be right. You might say, we're doomed, and you might be right. But really, when you do that kind of evaluations, given all these trends, both short and term, and amalgamation of all of them, your accuracy usually isn't very great because then you also have variables that come into it and yada, yada, yada. So a lot of people, they like that. They like the drama. I remember when I was a fan, I loved to think, we're going to the Super Bowl. Such a great feeling. And then when things weren't going right, it's like, we're the worst. This sucks. And that was a good feeling too because it was an emotional high generated from my fandom. Now, a lot of channels, they love that stuff. A lot of fans love that stuff. There's a lesser group of fans that kind of like evaluations where there isn't so much emotion involved. Now, I, unfortunately, am a very emotional guy, so I bring emotion into it. I'm not always Mr. Evaluator. And last podcast I did, I think it was a little bit of a mixture of both, but I really want to strive for good information here and accuracy. So I'm going to try to trim away a lot of the emotions, and I'm going to deal with the stuff that we saw last night and deal with the short-term, long-term trends and try to wrap up where the Dolphins are now as it looks forward through this season and going to the next one. But remember, the farther I get away from now, the less likely I'll be accurate. But I do think certain trends are long enough for us to kind of put our foot in the ground on something. So I'm going to get into positives and negatives. Now, before I get into all that, I'm going to have my chapters. It's going to be McDaniel, the offense, and then actually the offense itself, and then defense, and then fini. So, but I want to say thank you for stopping by, for the likes, the subscribes, the comments, especially the comments. I really appreciate that. That's like, I get such a rush out of like looking through the comments and talking to people, so I really appreciate that. But I want to give a shout out to my sponsors, Ace Per Head, because without you guys, without them, this channel is not going down. Ace Per Head's betting software is the premier white label platform for bookies to manage their players and grow their sportsbook operation. Click the link in the description below to get set up in minutes. Ask for the Curtis promo and get a special introductory discount. Clearly, the first 3 games, McDaniel, aside from that series of calls in the end zone in the Bills game, had a great string. We didn't really commit too many penalties. Everything was really gelled. People coming in and out. And everything seemed very coherent. But as instability seemed to hit the team and things kind of got more complicated with injuries and tape for other teams to look at, McDaniel has been making what I see as mistakes and growing pains. Now, I still think when you look at Hackett, he's like light years better than Hackett. Okay, light years better than Hackett. So to me, McDaniel in the initial evaluation is a cut above your poor or average head coach. Now, he took an extra task of being the offensive coordinator and the head coach. And, you can delegate and create a framework to make sure the duties are, handed out, but it's still a lot, especially for a guy that it's his first go around. So we have to keep that in mind. We have 7 games now, and so we have just about half and half of good and then bad and then some like men's amends. But we have to remember that when the external framework is not so hot, it gets harder and harder to do a job. And McDaniel has had tons and tons of adversity going into it. Now, Brian Flores had way more, and so it's not to say to justify McDaniel's situation, and it's not to say he's got the worst situation. But we have to remember it really took Flores till the end of the first season to really get his groove going. And then the next season, he got Gailey in. There's a little bit of turbulence for 3 or 4 games, and then they started kicking it off. And then, the rest. So it always takes time to gel, especially when you're a young guy into a new gig. And all these injuries really do play a major factor. But the biggest variable going forward, the Shanahan system, for lack of better terms, is run-based. You can have all the plays of passing and motion and all that dressing on top of the Christmas tree. But that stem that goes, the tree itself, I can't think of the word right now, goes up with everything is attached to all the branches and that you put the ornaments on and all that stuff. It's the run game. And really, the roots of that is the offensive line. When he was in San Fran, they had an unbelievable offensive line. And they had an unbelievable run game. So now he's here, and we find huge levels of inconsistency. But we've got to say, well, where is that stemming from? My personal contention, and it was mentioned last night, I've been saying it for a while, but it was mentioned last night, I think Chris Collins mentioned it, that zone stretch run, everything is based off that. The success you have out of that creates all kinds of other stuff. And then you add in the trouble in pass protection. Now, people want to say, Tua was back last night, and look at all the little pressure that we had. Well, yes and no. And I'm going to get into that for a second because that's not really a nuanced take. It really isn't. And I'm going to kind of show how that's not true. Now, last night, the Steelers had 17 pressures. We had 5. Why? Why was that? Some people might want to say the blocking just picked up. And in some regards, it did. You put Tehran in, and it alters things. You can go back and watch how differently things were when Tehran was not there. Once he comes in, and he didn't play super, super, duper great. He was pretty good. But he had some failings. We'll get into that too. But he was able to make some key blocks, especially on his own stretch, to get that guy out of the way. Opens all kinds of stuff. And a lot of stuff came off of him. And then you can take all your help and focus it on 4 guys. Now, the help part's what I want to talk about. If you go back and watch, there were tons and tons of plays where we ran play action and Waddle and Hill were the only two guys going out. Or, two wide receivers. And you literally had 8 guys blocking. And early on, we made a lot of hay with just 2 guys going out and completing those passes for big plays. But the Steelers began to understand what we were going to do, and they began to adapt. And that adaptation altered things. Now, we could have broken that adaptation if we ran the football. But we ran the football successfully early, and then later on, it began to get cut down and neutered and shut off. And we even were stopped in critical situations trying to run the football. Although that, I don't know why we tried to run it on 4th and 3 or whatever it was. I don't know, crazy. But anyway, the point being is McDaniel will never really able to do what he wants to do and what he can do unless he has a run game. And the run game is about the offensive line. You could do all your motions. You can have all your trick plays. You can have all your speed. And you can see how it gets teams on their feet and they start falling apart. But after a while, you figure it out. And unless you can attack the center of that defense, then you're going to struggle. And that's exactly what happened over and over and over from week 1 all the way to week 7. And it's going to continue. And that's a trend. And I want to wrap, because it's very easy to start saying, McDaniel suffered or whatever. If you go back all the way to 2013-ish, we haven't had a successful offensive line or run game. And then really, we didn't have a great run game there either. You'd have to go all the way back to Ricky. And then with Ricky, we had a pretty decent offensive line. It was okay, really mostly about Ricky. And all that time, we have been inconsistent. We're outside of Ricky and outside of a good offensive line. So coach after coach, team after team, year after year, it's been the same thing. So if we've seen this long-term trend, and you can go back over to Dan Marino. Yeah, we had Webb and Sims, but we couldn't run the football. And it was inconsistency there. So unless you have quality offensive line and a run game, you will be inconsistent. And this is why McDaniel is inconsistent, in my opinion. This doesn't mean that if he gets it, he's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I expect this to continue until we fix the offensive line and run game. Now, on offense, Tua came back. He had 5 pressures. The offensive line did block better. But like I said, if you check how we created that lack of pressure, you'll see it also restricted the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. Now, he had 2.38 seconds to throw the football. But if you dig deeper, he had time to throw 2.46 on 30 of his passes when he wasn't under pressure. So 2.5 seconds was usually the time that he had some pressure or got rid of the football. And this is not much farther off than other games. So we saw a lot more pressure. So Tua clearly helped. Tehran clearly helped. And also the ability to run early clearly helped. All this wrapped up. But a lot of this was generated by not sending guys into route, multiple 4 and 5 guys into the routes. We could not put 5 guys on the line, let them block, and send everybody else to catch the football. We had to keep 5, 6, 7, 8 guys into block. And when you do this, the Steelers were putting guys on man. They understood where they wanted to go, and they were cutting it off. Now, to McD's issue, he really wasn't able to adapt. How much of that was his inability, or was it the inability to run? That's where it gets shaky. Now, Tehran, he had a good night, but he struggled in the run game in some. In zone, he was excellent. In gap blocking, he was very poor. And I think that has a lot to do with his toe not being fully healthy. So he made a big difference, but he wasn't perfect. Connor had a really good day in run blocking, really, really good. But you could still see at times he does suffer a little bit from power. And because Eichenberg is so weak, that kind of takes this whole gap. And that gap is a weak gap. And it did play out, especially on a couple of those short runs inside. And also sometimes on the stretch when it's not all the way to the edge. Now, Eichenberg, he was a little bit better. He was almost passable. He was subpar. But subpar for Eichenberg is like glorious compared to what we've seen. He still struggles tremendously in run blocking. He's a shielder. He's not a drive blocker. He can't control his guy. He shields. And he did that pretty well. And he was relatively and reasonably pretty good. And a little bit of that is because they don't have any real pass rushers on that team without Watt. So I'd like to see it going forward. But he had a subpar game, which is better, and that really helped out a lot too. Shell, I've come to the conclusion, I think he's just a much better, he's better, not much better, but he's better at inside zone than outside zone. And my reason for that is if you check, his zone blocking was cold and his gap blocking was good. Now, a lot of it was stretch zones, and so he had to get on the move to block. Gap blocking is when there's a gap and you fill the gap and you start blocking guys, and that's a little bit more like zone in a sense. And so I just think that he played pretty well. He gave up, I think it was 2 pressures. So it wasn't a bad night, considering we only had 5, but he was very good in blocking, pretty good in blocking in certain areas, but others not so hot. Now Hunt, he played pretty good. He gave up 1 pressure. So a couple times I've seen him get beat. I felt like he took a little bit of a half step back. I don't know why that is. I have to see some more film on him. But overall, it was a good night except for the run blocking, because you take that early run blocking out and the production from the run game, and you'll go past, halfway through the second quarter, or maybe like into the beginning of the third quarter. I can't remember exactly. You can see they just stalled. And that's kind of why everything stalled. 16 points or 19 points. I can't remember what it is. 19 points? 9 points. I don't know. Whatever. Wasn't enough for us, not with this kind of talent. And again, I don't think it's about Tua, and I don't think it's about McDaniel. I think it's about the lack of a run game. Now, blocking from the tight end situation hurts us greatly as well. Gesicki, not so hot. But sadly, Hunter Long is just as bad, and he's not even involved in the passing game. So and Smythe's like, we really don't have. Connor Tanner did okay. Engel did okay. At times he's hot and then he's cold, but there's no real stars in the blocking with the fullback or with the tight ends at this moment. And that, when you add in all the offensive line, this creates huge instability. Now, Mostert, excellent. This guy was a great pickup. If he stays healthy and you gave this guy a real line to block consistently, man, this guy could do some wonderful stuff. Edmonds, it's curious. Now that I look into his history, he is a butterfingers. He has a long history of dropping the football. So the trend of him dropping the footballs is going to continue. And I think it was a wasted sign unless he's just a backup. And it doesn't make sense why they thought a long-term trend like this would change, but that's not for me to investigate it. You guys could think about why. So coverage generally was poor. We had moments that were nice. Feldheim came in, got that deflection. We got the interception, 3 of them. And there was moments of good coverage. But overall, we really, really got hurt. And for a team that really prides itself on jamming the line of scrimmage and giving looks, Brandon Jones, him being out, is going to be a heavy blow. Feldheim was victimized a little bit, and then he made some plays. He had that blitz, and then he had the drop for the deflection. But he is not Brandon Jones, and that's going to hurt us. And I think that's going to start putting more pressure on the secondary, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. Now, Noah was he had 6. He was targeted 8 times, and there was 6 completions on him for 75 yards, but only 9 of that was yak. If you watch him, Noah, he's had some plays, but what he does, and I'm going to say this over and over again, he does not trust his speed or explosion. He plays over leverage, like heavy over leverage. You could tell how a cornerback feels about himself, his speed, by how tight he plays somebody, especially in zones where he's got to drop. Noah, he drops instantly, and he's dropping hard. And anybody who's watching that and sees him come in with a good quarterback, because Pickett, he's got talent, but he does not a veteran, and he doesn't have the chemistry yet with these receivers and an offense to take care of that, because anybody's going to be like, oh, look what this guy does. He drops all the time, just do a comeback, do a out, a bite, a double, triple move, and he's going to be left behind because he plays so far over. And I think it's because he doesn't trust his speed and he doesn't trust his explosion. And that to me says there's limitations on him. But if he could be a guy that's a productive backup, that's much better than where he was trending. So maybe he could do more, but personally, I think the limitations are because of the way he drops, the over leverage that he uses, that it's so gross that I just don't think he has a trust in himself. And I think there's a reason for that lack of trust in himself. Now, Ingram, he seems to be slowing down. He's an older guy. He came out of the chute like ultra hot, but it kind of feels like he's getting a little tired. I think we might have to wait till like after the bye week where he can get a little time off. But I think a guy 33, 34 years old, he's starting to come down. Van Ginkel, I think he had 10 tackles on a day, but he had 3 stops and 7 run plays. That means he shut the play down. That's a really great day for this kid. And he was all over the place. And last week I noticed that too. I hope we can keep him because I like pairing him with Phillips. And Phillips had an excellent day. It's sort of been trending up. Not hard, but it sort of has. He had a very good day in run stop. Now, some of that was because he was a shooter on a couple of these, and he made some big stops behind the line of scrimmage because no one was in his way. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. His long-term trend is one who he can't get off blocks too much in the run game, but his pressure, he had 7 pressures and 2 sacks. He is trending in the right direction. Now, that trend might not be ultra elite. It might be effective player, and that's still a good thing. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Wilkins, he's going to cost a lot of money. Good player. A little bit of struggles last night, but a lot of that is because they give him the hardest assignment usually on the offense, on the defensive line. And he had some really good plays. This guy is going to be good. It wasn't his best game last night, but this guy is such a jack of many trades. He's going to end up being a very good player somewhere, hopefully here. Now, Sealer, he had a down night too. I don't know why. Both these guys have hurt hands, and so I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. They still had a decent night, but for their talent and what they've done in the past, it was a little bit of a blip on the radar. I expect both these guys to go back up as they heal, and I don't expect. I mean, these weren't bad games, but they weren't their usual games. Davis, I spoke last time about how his knee's buckling, and that knee was injured last year, and the knee was injured in preseason this year, and he's not looking like 2020, and it's concerning. This guy was an animal in 2020, but his production has just sunk down. I think he's just too tall, and when he's got that knee that's a little beat up, doesn't look like he can hold the leverage by being so tall. He's not playing terrible. He's playing like around average. Sometimes in the pass rush, he rises up a little bit. But for the most part, I see him getting moved so much more. So this is the D tackle spot that I see. And it's key because that's the core of everything, just like the offensive line. Sealer and Wilkins are going to have to carry us. Davis is just going to be... We're going to have to wait till next year to see that knee heal. I don't expect him to be fully healthy this year. Now, wrapping it all together, I think we're going to win the next bunch of games. So, over the next 4 games, I got wrong the last time. I think it's, we had the bye week, then it's another game. So, there's 4 games before we start getting to that tough stretch. And it's not going to be easy, that stretch. But we should be going 3-1 at the very least. Browns might give us a little toughness, and other ones could offer it, but they shouldn't, given what we have. But the problem is the offensive line. We're going to likely be inconsistent as long as we don't run the football, and I don't know how we run the football consistently. And so the long-term trend for us, we're going to have to wait until that last final stretch to see what McDaniel's made of. There's some highs, there's some lows. I think Tua is good. I'm not going to say he's great. I think he's good. If you gave him a run game, better protection, this guy could do his job. Last night, he looked a little bit off I mean, he makes some, questionable throws because he's so aggressive and almost foolishly aggressive at times. But his passes just didn't look super crisp. And so we're going to have to wait and see. We got the whole thing here opening up. And my concern is the run game and the offensive line. As long as Tehran's in, we'll be fine. But I think this pass game will continue to be inconsistent until we run the football. We've been that way since the beginning of the season. We're one of the worst in running the football. And so these are sizable trends right now as to why we are inconsistent. And I think it is a little bit of mitigating factors on McDaniel. I mean, his calls, his decision-making is not involved in that. But the actual production on the field, I think, is McDaniel needs to settle down and I think make some better calls. But we got to give him a little bit of time, okay? And overall, if we have 2 blocks of evaluation. We have now until the first game after the bye week, and then that last block against the hard teams in the critical portion. Right now, we have to pass this one. We can lose one, like I said, but let's not worry about the end of the season. Just focus on these next 4 games with the bye week, getting rest, and when Byron Jones comes back. But overall, I don't think the future looks totally bright, and I still don't think it looks dark. We just have to wait and see. Anyway, this is Curtis saying thanks for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed. It's a little bit of a long one. I kind of rambled maybe a little bit. I don't know. Anyway, catch you next time. Be well. Go Phins. Start building your own online sportsbook today by getting signed up with acebread.com service that'll allow you to book action on sports from all around the world.